What's up, everybody? Hope you guys are doing well. I know I'm doing good. I don't know about you guys, and one of the main reasons why I'm so excited right now is because the iPhone 5S is a phone that's near and dear to me. I thought it was going to die. I thought it was going to be dead. I didn't think it was going to get iOS 12, but little did we know that it actually got supported. So this is just a little bit of an updated review. It's probably going to be longer than the original one that I've already done this year, but a lot of things have changed. We've got new iPhones, we got a new budget iPhone, and on top of that, we have a new iOS and OS version that this phone supports. And considering this phone is 5 years old, over 5 years old at this point, it's kind of interesting to see how it's going to hold up, especially kind of continuing on with the later part of 2018, but also kind of early 2019 if you're seeing it then. But I will have an updated review then next year too, in a couple months too. But kind of looking around the body, you can see that it is the original design. It's a lot of bezel, it's Touch ID 1, and this is actually the first iPhone where we saw a fingerprint sensor, which is crazy. This phone had a humongous impact in my opinion, and I made a video not too long ago talking about how the iPhone 5S still amazes me pretty much, and that's completely the case still. I mean, the performance might be, I'll get into it in a second, but just the fact that it's even supported now is just crazy. This phone did come out in 2013 in September, so it's almost 5 years old, but it's actually a little bit over 5 years old at this point. I'll try my best to release this video as close to it as possible, as close to that release date, but you guys know how busy I am. Now looking at the front, it had a 4-inch screen. It still has a 4-inch screen. The resolution is kind of important. It's 640 by 1136, so it was never HD, which is okay. It's a smaller form factor, so the PPI was around 326 pixels per inch, so it's not the lowest panel, but it's also like not sharp at all. But surprisingly, looking at it now, it's really not that bad. I mean, don't get me wrong, like you guys are going to point out that, oh my god, you said the LG G2 had a horrible display. You said this one had a horrible display. And I'm saying when you factor in the age of this phone and everything like that, I'm not going to say I would pick this display over like a Note 9 display or anything like that, but I'm saying like at the time, it's really not horrible, I think. I don't know. But you do have to remember that this phone had a place in time, and I think as the whole entire, iPhone lineup, I think this one definitely had a pretty big impact. Not the biggest, but a noticeable one, just because they reused this body type to the iPhone SE as well. So obviously this body did something right. But this phone did not originate it. The iPhone 5 originated it, just kind of carried it on. But you guys know what I mean. Now, like I said, the biggest advantage of this phone and why it's so monumental in my opinion is because it came out so long ago, and because of that, it's still supported. Not because of that, but because of the longevity of this phone. It's just crazy. And that's why a lot of people might still have it. Now, starting off, it actually got iOS 7 back in 2013, which is pretty crazy. I mean, that was a long time ago. I mean, this thing saw iOS 8, 9, 10, and 11, and now it's getting all of iOS 12 too, so it's pretty insane. And this phone, a lot of people have kind of commented and said, is it going to go further than iOS 12? Is it whatever? I'm telling you guys right now, it's not going to get iOS 13, so it's going to get all of iOS 12. It's going to stop getting supported June at WWDC, not June, but like May-ish, whatever. Before the release of iOS 13, it's going to get done. They're going to put it in the coffin, and they're going to be done with it. I don't see this phone going any further than that, just because this phone technically got an extra year of support usually than what it does. But the main reason why I see Apple discontinuing this phone, and also the 6 and 6 Plus, is because of the specs inside. The 5S and the 6 are kind of more closely related in specs than the 6 and the 6S in terms of raw performance and everything. So I'll definitely say that this phone and the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus are not going to get iOS 13, which is sad. But again, it is my opinion. Maybe they're going to get it, but I really don't see that happening at all. Now, in terms of the specs, it actually has the Apple A7 chip, a dual-core CPU clocked at 1.3 gigahertz and 1 gigabyte of RAM. Now, with those specs, you would probably assume that this phone is pretty slow, and I would 100% attest to that. This phone is slow in the terms of that when you compare it to like an iPhone 10 or something like that, it's noticeably slower, but it's still a phone and it still functions. I'll give it that. Like opening apps, it can play games kind of and all these other things, and I'll say like as a phone it functions pretty well. I don't have any problems with it. It's just slow. Everything you're going to do with it is just slower. So when you go from an iPhone 10 to an iPhone 5S, which nobody's going to do, but I'm just saying like when you're kind of comparing the performance to a newer thing and an older thing, you do notice that yeah, it takes longer, but it doesn't really stop you from doing anything. So if you have an iPhone 5S or you're planning on getting one or anything, it's just slow. Like you can still do everything you're going to do on it, but it's just going to take you a little bit longer. So if you have patience, then I guess that's key. But really, when you're looking at it, it just really depends on your perspective. If you give an iPhone 5S to your grandma or your grandpa, make sure you say what's up to them for me. You will pretty much not have any complaints because it's going to be slow, but like they're not going to care. Also, if you give it to like some 6-year-old, they're also not going to care. They just want to play something like Temple Run and Doodle Jump and stuff. But it's when you start getting into that like college, having a job kind of area, you will notice that sometimes it is a little bit too slow. Your boss might want you to type something on a paper or whatever, and then you want to make edits on it on your phone. Like, it's like things like that, in scenarios like that, that's where you're going to see some performance decrease. You're going to be like, man, that's when you're going to start complaining, honestly. Is it a horrible phone? Is it horrible in performance? I guess not. I know a lot of people want me to say it is, but I mean, really, it just does things slower. And that is a huge disadvantage. I mean, if you're not comparing it to any other phone side by side, you will probably still notice that it's pretty slow. But iOS 12 did kind of speed things up a little bit. iOS 11 was really weird. iOS 12 does speed it up a little bit, but like I said, it's still going to be slow. I've seen multi-core scores for this thing that I've tested every single OS version upgrade. It's around like 68,000, 65,000, so less than 70,000. I've seen it go down to like 58 one time too. So again, I would not say this phone is extremely fast, but it's just a slow phone. What can I say? In terms of gaming, I will say it does shock me a little bit just because this phone is still pretty decent at gaming. It's not like better than anything else in the market, but it's kind of amazing. And what I mean by that is that it plays games like okay. And granted, they play on lower frame rates and lower graphics and all that, but it's still kind of shocking that this phone is still being kind of supported, even in terms of updates for these games as well. So if you get this phone, you're going to spend like not that much money on it. You're not going to complain about it. From a real standpoint, you're going to have a pretty weird time owning this phone in terms of performance. Now, switching to the camera, this is again one of those things, it's pretty lackluster at this point, but I think at the time it kind of brought a lot. Okay, it had an 8 megapixel sensor, you were able to shoot 1080p and 720p at 120 frames per second. You had a dual LED flash. You didn't have optical image stabilization, but what you did have is the option of shooting in slow motion, which was a huge thing at the time. I believe the iPhone 5 was not able to shoot in slow motion, but I could be totally wrong with that. But the iPhone 5S was able to, which was super cool, and that's a pretty huge advantage. If you're into that kind of stuff, you have that ability still on the iPhone 5S, and I've seen some phones that don't even have that option stock with phones that were released just like 2 or 3 years ago, which is pretty surprising. I mean, you're able to shoot in higher frame rates and slow it down later, but I'll say that 100% that is a cool thing. But in terms of portrait mode, portrait lighting, all those things, you don't have any of those features here. You don't have live photos. Again, that's one of those things that you kind of do have to give up if you're planning on getting this phone. But I think if you're getting an iPhone 5S, you probably know you're not going to get the latest and greatest features in terms of the camera and all those cool little things that the newer iPhones have. So it's a decent camera. It's probably like a 5 out of 10, 5.5 out of 10 maybe. But if you're in outdoor conditions and everything, I don't think you're going to be complaining too much. Indoor conditions start changing a little bit. But even that, like I said, if you're getting this phone, I don't think you're expecting the best camera. It also has a 1.2 megapixel front-facing camera, and it's okay. You can shoot 720p videos out of it at 30 frames per second. So it's one of those things where it's like you're going to get a phone that you know is older. It's not going to have the best parts, so you kind of have to keep that in mind. Now, going on to another part of the phone that I'm not really a huge fan of, it's the battery. It's 1560 milliamp hours, 1560 milliamp hours, and you know, it's the standby time is pretty good, I'll say, just because I guess iOS on the iPhone 5S was just the standby time was crazy. But what I will say is that if you're using this phone at all, you will kind of have a weird time owning it in terms of battery life, just because it is a smaller battery. The phone wasn't really performance heavy, but I think the Apple A7 chip didn't really do a good time at battery management. And another sad thing about this phone is that this phone is not under the warranty that Apple created for the $30 battery replacement. So they only did the iPhone 6 and newer iPhones. So if you get this phone now, you will actually have to change it yourself. But one cool little advantage of owning this phone and getting this phone, I will say that I can think of, is the parts to fix this phone are extremely cheap. Like the screen costs like dollars to fix. The battery, you can get one new one for like dollars as well. And if you break anything in this phone, you can replace it fairly cheap. And that is a pretty big advantage when you're getting a phone. You know, we have these new iPhones like the XS and all these, and to fix it, you actually have to take it into Apple if you want everything working perfectly. Even with the iPhone 7, you can't fix the screen yourself without the home button breaking. So having a phone like this, I mean, I fixed the iPhone 5S screen here too, and it worked perfectly fine. And I'll definitely say that one huge advantage of getting this is just because it's so cheap, just to not even to get it, but fixing it as well. And there's not a lot of phones out there from 2013 that are still supported by their phone manufacturers, and honestly cannot even name one. I mean, even Google, their Pixels, their Nexuses, those are all unsupported as well. So the fact that this phone is still supported is pretty insane. So some other notable things to note, this phone does have a headphone jack. It's pretty funny to say it came out in 2013. It also has a lightning port, so you can use all those like lightning port accessories. Now, one bad thing is that this phone does not have any like IP60 something dust and water resistance. So if you plan on getting this phone and you get water on it, just know that you probably will have to check to see if it's good and good condition and working and everything. But really, I wouldn't complain too much about it. But really, it came out in 2013. Not a lot of phones at the time had that type of certification, so Now, one little thing I want to add as well is that this phone only came in 3 storage sizes, 16, 32, and 64. So if you plan on getting this phone, the highest you can get is 64 gigs. Not a horrible deal breaker or anything, but that kind of does limit the amount of worth itness, in my opinion, of like, is it still worth it? So to answer the question, the burning question you all have, is the iPhone 5S still worth it in the later part of 2018? This is how I'll frame the answer, okay? If you currently do own an iPhone 5S, let's say you own it as your daily driver, I'll say there's really no harm in keeping it. You can keep it just a little bit longer if you'd like, because phones are only getting cheaper. The iPhone 6s, 7, 8, whatever, those are all getting cheaper. So if you want to keep it as long as you can, and then just upgrade whenever you feel like it. I think that's the best way I can frame that part. But if you currently don't own an iPhone 5S, I'll say this is not a good option. Probably the lowest I would go in terms of like iPhones in general is like an iPhone 6s. That is the lowest or oldest iPhone you should get, just because that's like pretty safe. You can still get a couple more years of support, and on top of that you have 2 gigabytes of RAM, and the performance isn't that bad either, and you have a 12 megapixel camera and you can shoot in 4K. So in that sense, I'll say I would not recommend an iPhone 5S if you currently do not own an iPhone 5S. But what I will say and add on top of that is that if you're planning on giving this phone to like your grandma or grandpa, your little kid who doesn't care what like a 1 gigabyte of RAM is, give it to them. They're not going to care. So I'll say in terms of that, they're not going to be able to miss out on too much. I mean, I doubt they're going to play heavy intensive games. I doubt they're going to shoot in 4K or anything like that. So I'll be glad to recommend it to seniors and like the toddlers and children and stuff. But if you're like a working person, if you're like a person who's kind of busy and has schoolwork and stuff, or even a job, an iPhone 5S would just be detrimental to you. I would recommend at least an iPhone 6s. So that's kind of my opinion on that. I'm not hating on the iPhone 5s. I love this thing. I'm always going to keep one. They're just awesome little phones, but they're awesome in the terms of what they brought. They're not really awesome anymore. But guys, that is pretty much it. That is my opinion. I'll leave a link in the description below to an iPhone 6s if you want to pick one up. I would highly recommend that over an iPhone 5s. And if you get it through that link, you'll actually help support the channel too. So I would really recommend that. But comment down if you guys have any questions or anything like that. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, Alpaca. I do a lot more iOS reviews. I even threw the iPhone 5s in there a couple times. So if you guys like these videos, you could potentially like those videos as well. So check out the link in the description. I really appreciate it. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.